Welcome to Southall Twilight, a compilation video of 3 films stored in the care of the British Commercial Vehicle Museum Trust Archives. You are about to see a unique film of the AEC Mandator V8 on a road test, and up to now, this is the only AEC lorry film to have been discovered. It was made as a silent film, but the 2 later films about the Leyland Marathon are shown as they were originally made with their commentaries. The marathon was designed and built at AEC's Southall factory after the demise of the Mandator V8, and these films were made for promotional purposes, so please excuse the obvious sales pitch they contain and enjoy their content, with plenty of excellent lorry scenes from the 1970s. The official launch of the AEC Mandator V8 took place in May 1968. Prototypes had been allocated to Western Transport, Russell of Bathgate and Turners of Soham in late 1966. The trade magazine, Commercial Motor, announced the first details of the model in their edition of the 24th of May 1968, and this first film follows the Mandator V8 along their extensive and demanding road test route. The test took place in either February or March of that year. The AEC was loaded to its legal maximum gross vehicle weight of 32 tonnes by loading 22 tonnes of test weights onto a 33-foot Bowden triaxle trailer, this combination giving the legal maximum overall length for the time. The compact 12-litre V8 engine was a totally new AEC design, and by 1968 its installation in a new Mandator chassis had resulted in some complex and detailed engineering work. This Mandator V8 is a version fitted with the 10-speed pneumocyclic semi-automatic gearbox, which was a 5 main gears plus splitter arrangement with a fluid clutch, a totally new engine and gearbox combination for a lorry and very ambitious for the 1960s. Before starting the road test proper, the usual braking and hill restart tests were carried out. The Mandator V8 also had some new and innovative features in its brakes. They were operated by a full air pressure system, of course, which had been a standard feature on all AECs for many years previously, but the parking brake worked on all 4 tractor wheels and was a new locking actuator design. The tractor unit was piped up for 3-line trailer braking and was fitted with a dual brake valve with a load sensing arrangement as standard. The standard rear axle ratio fitted in the AEC Mandator V8 was 6 1/4 to 1, which allowed a fully laden restart on a hill as steep as 1 in 6. Lower back axle ratios were available as options for operators who needed them. The V8 engine was normally aspirated, although from the outset the fitting of a turbocharger was catered for in the design. This was for later developments. At this stage, the engine's output was 247 brake horsepower, measured in the old Imperial units, which was quite a lot of power for the time, and today the equivalent rating would be 265 brake horsepower, making this AEC the most powerful tractor unit available for normal road transport duties in 1968. Because the engine was compact and set back in the chassis, the cab was a walk-through design, allowing 3 people to be seated in comfort inside. After the braking tests and hill starts, it was out onto the M1 and M6 motorways. At this time, the motorway network was far from complete, and many people would argue it still is today. And as the AEC travels along at 60 miles per hour, we can see how little traffic there was on the roads 30 years ago. The standard back axle ratio gave the V8 a geared top speed of 64 miles per hour, but almost anyone who ever drove one of these AECs will say that they would go much faster. The engine could rev up to 2,600 revs per minute, and the lorry's speed and power reduced journey times considerably when the model entered service with transport fleets. Ron Sinclair of Evesham is just one haulier who fondly remembers his Mandator V8s, and they reduced the time of his runs between Evesham and Glasgow by well over 1 hour. The Mandator V8 was a premium specification lorry, which was technically advanced for its time. Some would say it was 20 years ahead of its time, and with hindsight it was woefully underdeveloped when it was launched. As a result, there were many problems with them in service, but none of the faults were insurmountable. Mostly, they were associated with overheating and the consequences of that. This road test, however, seems to have been trouble-free, with the AEC storming along in fine fashion. In addition to the prototypes mentioned before, several other Mandator V8s were operating in AEC's own works transport fleet at the time of the test. Also, one or two demonstrators were available, and a couple more have been allocated to other large fleets such as BRS and Hipwood and Grundy of Farnworth. The first fuel stop we see was at Fortin Services on the M6 north of Preston. The 75-gallon tank was filled to the brim so that accurate amounts of diesel could be recorded for precise fuel consumption figures to be worked out. The commercial motor road test covered 740 miles, and the overall fuel consumption was a fraction below 8 miles per gallon. A good figure for the time from an 8-cylinder engine, which was subjected to some severe hill climbing, as we will see shortly. Now the hard work for the Aec V8 starts, the long and punishing climb along the A6 over Shap. With cold weather apparent, any potential overheating problems were eased, although the old hands will remind us that the infamous Shap tailwind could always cause problems whatever the weather. The semi-automatic gearbox in this Mandator would allow some very rapid downshifts, and for maximum performance, the V8 engine needed to be kept in the higher revs band. Whilst this particular gearbox was listed as the standard fitment for the model, in fact, the majority of the 309 Mandator V8s which entered service in the British Isles had manual, constant mesh, 6-speed overdrive gearboxes. Some even had a 5-speed direct top version fitted, and others had an optional 10-speed manual splitter box, which was probably the most suitable one for the engine. About 50 Mandator V8s were also exported, mainly to Australia and New Zealand. It can be bleak over Shap at any time of the year, and in winter particularly so. But it does have a certain charm, and the Mandator V8 did have a powerful heater to keep the driver and crew warm and comfortable. When this film was made, the M6 motorway was being extended to Carlisle, and the completion of the Penrith bypass in 1969 would mean the end for Shap as a main trunk road, giving a much easier and unrestricted through route between England and Scotland. After crossing the border, the AEC takes a lovely scenic route through the Scottish border country, giving a thorough testing for the engine and gearbox and also its riding and handling characteristics. There was no power steering on this model, although it was an optional extra. As we watch the Mandator V8 travelling through some marvellous scenery and historic border towns for the next few minutes, it does seem hard to believe that this film is about 30 years old. The styling of the cab, although rather angular and square by today's standards, was revolutionary for its time, and in many ways it was a big improvement for the driver on anything else available before this cab design was launched in 1965. But it did lead to one or two problems for the chassis designers and engineers. The radiator was too small, and this was influenced by the cab, which also restricted air circulation around the engine. As a result, V8 engines were prone to overheating, and this could often cause one or more pistons to pick up on the cylinder liners. Later in the film, a clear rear view of the cab shows the very small radiator header tank, and again, this didn't help the cooling predicament. The other major engine problem apparent with this V8 design was the narrowness of the big end journals and the short life of the bearings. Again, this problem had a solution, but a shortage of development funds for the project meant that it was never satisfactorily resolved. However, as we watched the AEC tackling this test route, many of these problems had yet to show themselves, and only did so when more lorries entered service in the weeks and months following the official launch. Amongst the first buyers of this new AEC model were such operators as Arthur Guinness, Air Products, the Road Transport Industry Training Board, Courage Brewers, Wilmots of Wells, Humber Warehousing, Jack Ashworth of Bradford, Leathers Chemicals, Jack Henley, Ron Sinclair, Sam Anderson, Liquids, Powders and Gases Transport, Siddle C. Cook, A&R Wood of Kent and Olcan. Several of these customers ordered more than one V8, and one or two of them, such as the Road Transport Industry Training Board and Air Products, were to operate sizable numbers of mandated V8s. Indeed, Air Products had over 20 of them in the 2 years they were made, so they could not have been all that bad, surely, particularly as Air Products operated very demanding delivery schedules to their own customers. This commercial motor test route is a punishing one, with several severe climbs such as Carter Bar, and others further on along the A68 in Northumberland and County Durham. Some hills, like the famous Kilnpit Hill, are in fact steeper than Shap, although they are not as long, but they still represent the severest of tests for any lorry. As the film follows the AEC's progress through County Durham, look out for the old Consett steelworks, reminding us of the region's proud industrial heritage. Who could have thought then that such a site and complex would be demolished a few years later? And then again, if in 1968 someone had said to you that the days of the AEC mark were numbered, would you have believed them? Such is the march of time and the changes we all see in our lifetimes, but not always are they perceived to be for the best. The AEC Mandator V8 remained in production for almost 2 years, and it was the persistent problems in service which caused its withdrawal. As mentioned earlier, none of these were beyond the capabilities of the AEC engineers to rectify, but such was the turmoil by 1970 within the whole of the British Leyland Empire that amongst other things there was a severe shortage of money for the necessary modifications to be made to the vehicle. Production of the model was suspended in January 1970, and it was intended to relaunch it at a later date when its reliability had been improved. Things went from bad to worse within the group, and the relaunch never happened. A larger cylinder bore version of the V8 had been introduced, and it proved to be more reliable than the original unit, but the project was quietly abandoned. Most operators of the Mandator V8s were sympathetic to AEC, and the company gave its customers the option of either carrying on with the lorries they were running or having them replaced on a buyback scheme. This policy went a long way to maintaining AEC's legendary reputation for excellent after-sales service, and many operators who had experienced problems with the V8s remained loyal to the AEC mark. The AEC V8 engine had been earmarked as the Leyland Group's high-power output unit for the 1970s and beyond, and it was also fitted into a few Mammoth Major 6-wheeler tractor units, 4 Sabre luxury coach chassis and an experimental Scammell Crusader tractor unit. There can be very few other lorry models which have supposedly failed and have evoked such interest through the years as the AEC Mandator V8. When they were going well, there was nothing else on the road in the late 1960s to touch them, and they are fondly remembered by everyone who drove them. They are a classic, if only case. So much promise and potential, but sadly, never to be fulfilled. We are reaching the end of the commercial motor road test section of the film when it peters out on the A1M in County Durham. There is, however, some more footage of a Mandator V8, taken, we believe, a few weeks later. It is probably the same tractor unit, but see if you can spot the differences. Here we are again, and a few spring flowers on the roadside verges indicate warmer weather. The Mandator V8 is still fully loaded, and incidentally, those Bowden triaxle trailers were one of the lightest designs available at the time, but now, just like AEC, Bowden is another name of the past. purpose of this next few minutes of film is not known, but is probably a routine road test carried out by AEC engineers. Hopefully there is no problem with the airlines, but this gives a good view of the inadequate radiator header tank I mentioned earlier, and also a good shot of the air cleaner mounted on the near side. We can also get some excellent views inside the cab in the next minute or two, and these show what a fine driving position the AEC tilt cab, not only when fitted onto the V8 chassis, but also typical of the whole AEC lorry range then, gave the driver. Many of us who drove AECs of that era still favour the fairly upright back of the seat position, even though modern lorries today have seats with an almost infinite combination of positions. Also close at hand are all the switches, instruments and gear lever. These cabs rather erroneously have become known as ergomatics, or even worse, abbreviated to ergo, but AEC never called them that. They were tilt cabs, although ergonomically designed by the famous Giovanni Michelotti. Here are a few more reminders of the past. Who can remember Blue Star garages and Regent petrol and diesel? Even better, Derb at 5 and 10 pence farthing a gallon, equivalent to 29 pence a gallon today. Actually, these garage forecourt scenes give me an excellent clue to dating this film as being early 1968, because in that same year, Texaco had acquired the Regent Oil Company and was in the process of changing all Regent forecourt pumps to the Texaco brand, which they had achieved by the end of 1968. We will have to turn round and come back to have the diesel tank on the correct side for filling up. Yes, attended service too. Those were the days. We are near the end of the film of the AC Mandator V8, unique footage of what was a highly advanced lorry for its time. Such a specification was ambitious for the late 1960s, but it was so very nearly right and could and should have been made to succeed. The withdrawal of the model in 1970 left AEC and the parent Leyland Group without a high specification premium tractor unit to combat growing sales of European and Scandinavian models. In 1973, the hastily designed and conceived Marathon Mark I was introduced to fill such a role, and it too was a Southall product. The films which follow are about the Marathon.